Я начинаю? All right. Good evening. We are going to start our session today. It's going to be in English because we have a distinguished guest today, Magnus Hammer, who is Secretary General of International Tenants Association, and he's going to speak about rental housing, which is extraordinarily important topic for this country because, well, you know probably everything about the residential mobility, how important is this. It is how important is many social issues such as unemployment, which can be solved by residential mobility. And so it's not only this point, I'm sure, well, Magnus is going to cover many more interesting points related to rental housing. We really welcome Professor Hammer here. So, well, he used to be professor, right? So he actually taught a lot. And we will organize our session in a normal way. So, well, Magnus is going to speak for half an hour or so, and then we will have a Q&A session. Afterwards, well, I will give the floor to Tatiana Borodina, the head of the non-governmental association of tenants, head of Russian Association of Tenants, based in Yaroslavl, and we welcome Tatiana here. And we really would like to hear from you afterwards, right? Okay, thank you very much. And now, Magnus, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
See if I can maneuver this. So, do I need a microphone, do you think?
The microphone would be much better because we have translation.
Okay, so I'll maneuver both of them, right and left hand.
Okay, and we also have video.
Okay. So thank you everyone for coming tonight, this very late hour. I was surprised when they told me that I would have a lecture at 8:30 in the evening. I thought, will there be any people there at all? So I'm very glad, I'm very proud that you're here tonight. Thank you for coming. I will try to explain something about the concept of rental housing. We had an interesting discussion, last night, and very quickly, housing, everyone knows what housing is, residential housing. Okay, fine. And then you start talking about social housing, public housing, private rental housing, and all the different systems. And I tell you, after 5 minutes, most people are lost. Because the concept of housing is such a cultural thing that most of us are born with. I'm Swedish. So I was born with a Swedish housing system. If you go to France, they're born with the French housing system. And here you have the Russian housing system. It has changed, I assume, the last 20 years, but still, it's something you were brought up with and learned to understand. So I will try to use my pedagogical possibility to try to explain what I mean with housing. And also I will speak about tenant associations. So let me see if I can get this working. So my organization consists of 64 national and regional organizations in 44 countries. And those of you who got the English edition of the magazine, on the second page there's a list of all the countries where we have members. And in some countries we have more than one member. Like in Australia, we have one member in each state. And of course the same thing with the United States. We don't have members in all the states, but in some of the states we have members. And in Switzerland, we have members. We have 3 members. One for the German-speaking part, one for the Italian-speaking part, and one for the French-speaking part, because they're so different. In my country, Sweden, there is only one tenant association. In France, Italy, tenant associations are very political. So they're often linked to political parties or even to churches. So in Italy, there's a Catholic one, there's a communist one, there's a social democratic one, and there's even a right-wing tenant association. And they all fight between each other for the same tenants. But that's the way they've always done it. So it's very political. Oh, I don't know where it's... Okay. So my office where I work from is in Stockholm. I work together with the Swedish Union of Tenants. They sponsor the International Union of Tenants, this international secretariat. And we also have an office in Brussels since a couple of years back, and that office is sponsored by the German Tenant Association, the Deutsche Mieterbund. Our organization celebrates its 90th anniversary this year, so it's quite old. And it was formed just 3 years after the Association of Property Owners, the Association of Landlords. So there was a letter sent out to all the letters, hey, tenants, we also have to organize ourselves. Now the landlords have organized themselves, so we have to organize themselves. And just imagine in 1926, it took some time. There were no faxes, there were no emails. You have to send letters and wait for weeks and then come back. So there was a meeting set up in Zurich. And those of you who can read well, you can see the organizations who were there were from Czechoslovakia, Germany, Hungary, Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, England, France, Austria, and also Danzig. Danzig, those of you who know your story know that Danzig was a free state in between the two wars, northern Poland. Dansk is called nowadays. And this is the situation why the tenants had to organize themselves. Most tenants, most poor people, lived in dilapidated houses, damp, dark, overcrowded like this. And this was the situation in most industrialized parts of the world. We do some bilateral projects. This last year and also this year, we worked together with Organization of Civic Rights in South Africa, which has actually, it was started by one of the guys who sat with Nelson Mandela at Robben Island. And when he came, I was Fred, he formed the Organization of Civic Rights. And that has turned into a tenant association. And last autumn, we also assisted groups in Dublin, Ireland, to form a tenant association there. So this is what we try to do, assist and the knowledge we know about organizing groups like this. We do the Global Tenant magazine. We do it in English, and then we have a group who translates it to French. And then we have students here for the School of High School of Economics here in Russia, students who translate it into Russian. And we have it from this office that we have in Brussels. We thought first, because housing is actually not a topic for the European Union. It's not a competence, as you say, because the same thing with traffic, education, taxes, and also housing. It's not an EU topic. But suddenly, after a while, there were topics that came into housing, like what we say, high energy costs for tenants, of course, for everyone is a problem in Europe. Social cohesion, it's about fighting segregation in housing areas, where you should have just poor people and rich people, so we try. State aid to housing. According to EU laws, state aid from governments is only allowed to social housing. It's not allowed to private housing. So it should be for low-income people. But this has created a problem because in many countries you have social housing not only for poor people. I will tell you later about the situation in Austria, so you see, in the Netherlands, and in my country, in other countries. Because we don't want social housing to be just for the poor people. It should also be for middle-income people. So there should be a mix. But this was a fight with the European Commission. And of course, we advocate for affordable rents, because we say that housing is, of course, a human right. And housing is not like another commodity. It's not like a car or a book or a new jumper or a shirt, because then you can choose. I can choose between a cheap car and an expensive car. If I can't afford this shirt, I go for a cheaper shirt. But for housing, it's different. And it's something that everyone needs, housing. And most people cannot, most middle class and low income people just have to go and find housing where there is housing available. And they shouldn't have to pay too much. And it's also a fundamental, what we say, pillar in democratic societies. And it's also in countries where there's lack of housing, people move in and out, and you feel afraid you can be evicted the next day. Those societies are not very politically stable either. So when people have houses, when fathers and mothers have houses, rooms, or even a house or a flat where you can bring up your family, you feel much more secure and you create stable societies. So this is where we have members in Europe, in the blue fields here. So I put that in red for Ireland because that's the organization we're setting up at the moment. And if we look at the world, we have members in the North America, in Africa, South Africa, I mentioned, Australia, New Zealand, we have 2 members, Japan and India. And it's funny with this organization in Japan, there was this man, or there were a couple of men, who ran this Japanese tenant association in Tokyo. And they had no idea. They'd been working like this for 20 years, and they didn't know about us. And they thought they were the only tenant association in the world. So when they found out about us, a whole family for them to come into, they were so happy. So now they have lots of communication with Tokyo because they're so glad to find that there are other people working with the same topics. Public housing or social housing started in Central Europe before there were lots of rental housing. Most of London, most of Stockholm, most of all major cities, people lived as tenants, as private tenants. But of course, with no rights whatsoever. But people rented and rented for years and come. But then you had the First World War. And then there was the revolution in Russia, 1917. And lots of governments, they were afraid that the revolution would spread westwards into Europe, into Western Europe. So they knew that the war was coming to an end, and also that these soldiers were workers and soldiers, but think about the soldiers, they were coming back to their home cities. They've been writing letters to their dear ones, saying, I'm coming back home now, let's get married, let's form a family. But what happened when they came back? There was no housing, or it was very bad housing. And the governments understood this. So they started building massive public or state-owned housing. And it all started in Central Europe, particularly in Switzerland, Austria, Hungary. So maybe some of you have been to Vienna and seen the Karl Marx Hof. It's from 1928, and it has 1,400 flats, and it's over 1 kilometer long. There used to be even more flats, but they have made some of the smaller flats into bigger flats to house families even now. But it stands there as a monument, I would say, because it's beautiful, and inside there's a huge garden with fountains, etc. And it was very modern. Most of these people, the women, they have been forced to do their laundry way down in the basement, somewhere in the darkness. And now there were bright, new laundry rooms for these women. But the happiness sort of came to an end in the middle of the 1930s when fascists took over Vienna, and then Germany annexed Austria, and the new fascist government in Vienna, they banned all political parties, all the trade unions, and also including the International Union of Tenants, because the International Union of Tenants had by then moved from Zurich to Vienna. So this is Vienna today, and the city of Vienna is very, very proud of their social housing. That means it's housing owned by the city of Vienna. And the city of Vienna is the largest landlord of housing in the whole world. It owns, builds, administrates about 220,000 flats in Vienna. And this is the famous Hundertwasser house in Vienna. It's built in the 1980s. Has anyone been there and visited it? Now, as I tell you, if you want, you have been there. If you want to see beautiful housing and social housing, you should go to Vienna. It's my role model. I always bring up Austria and Vienna when I talk about housing, because even my Swedish friends are beginning to get a bit tired of me now, because I always say, go to Vienna, I say. And this is another social housing. It was built in 1996. And it's a sort of a test thing because it's called inter-ethnic housing. So it was said that 50% of the people living there should be Austrians, native Austrians, and 50% should be not native Austrians, immigrants from Syria, Turkey, Bosnia, or wherever they come from. So it was a bit of like an experiment, but it's been working now for 10 years. And they have set up, because they knew that there would be problems, of course. It's always problems when you have mixed cultures in the beginning. So they have professional mediators. So they have people taking care of, quarrels that will have happened and discussions. But they also have a lot of, if you let's say volunteer to live here, you must also accept that you have to social activities together with the whole building. And as you can see, they have nice roof terraces here. And in the middle of the courtyard here, you can't see it, but there is an artificial small stream of water for the kids to play with boats. And Vienna says that the city of Vienna says that we should have the best housing in the whole city. And the private landlords, they have to live up to this. They have to compete with the city. And this is social housing at its best. Then there was a big plot of land in the middle of Vienna where there used to be Europe's largest coffin factory. Coffin where you bury people. And of course, you can imagine throughout the wars, a lot of coffins were needed throughout the wars. So there was this plot of land with this old factory. And there was a group of young academics. They were architects, engineers, and some other social workers who got together and asked the city of Vienna, can we get this plot of land? Can we build a house here? So they built the Sargfabrik of social housing there. And this is what it looks like in the basement. Nice sauna, solarium, and a little small swimming pool, etc. So these are examples of what social housing can look like at its best. But I won't show you pictures from England. I won't show you pictures from many other countries where social housing, I say, is a disgrace. It's only for very poor people. So it's very different what social housing can look like. But what they all have in common is that there are often income limits to social housing. You cannot earn more than a certain level, then you're out. No, you're not out from this. Let's say it like this. In Austria and Vienna, even if you become CEO or you win the lottery or you become a millionaire, you can still live here in these houses. They raise your rent a little, but they want you to stay here so you have a good mix of people. This is what it looks like in Austria, the housing stock. So you can see how home ownership and private rental is about half. And then you have social rental housing. Almost half of everything in Vienna is social housing. The income limits to apply for social housing is about 3,000 euros a month, which is, I figured out, is about 234,000 rubles.
Per family.
This is for two people. For two people. So, what the European Union and European Commission doesn't like is that 80% of all Austrians actually, income-wise, they are eligible for social housing. They can apply for social housing. And the European Commission thinks that this is way too high, social housing, because you can give state aid about this concerning competition, should only go for low-income households. But still, 60% of all Austrians live in housing which has been subsidized in one way or another. And most Austrians don't know that from every monthly salary, 0.00 something, a small percentage of every person's working salary goes to a house, goes for a tax, for a housing fund. And private individuals, private companies, social housing builders can apply for funding from this housing fund. So even if you have a house outside Vienna, you can apply for funding if you want to put on, let's say, you would want to do energy renovation in the building, insulate, put in new windows, maybe solar panels, so you can apply for this fund. So it's a win-win. So even though a lot of people think they don't even know about it, you can apply for the money to renovate your house, private or social. Another country, the Netherlands. This is Amsterdam. And this is the housing stock in Amsterdam. You have ownership, 29%, private rental, 26%, and social rental again, very high. There is a higher income social housing. This is for the whole family. 35,740 euros per year you can earn. And also, flats are regulated. They don't say we have social housing really, but all flats in Amsterdam, which have a maximum rent of 711 euros per month, are included as a regulated accommodation with a regulated rent. If they go over 711, they're out of the system, and then market rents, there are market rents. And these houses are mainly built by housing associations in the Netherlands, non-for-profit housing associations. And also here, you can stay in Amsterdam, because a lot of people want to stay in Amsterdam, and you can stay also there if you get a higher salary. You pay a little more, but you're welcome to stay. Germany, just a small part, as you can see, the blue part, just 4% social housing. And then the rest is either ownership or private rental housing. But almost more than 50% is private rental housing. And how they do it here is that even social tenants, let's say tenants with a lower income, can also find a flat in the private rental sector, because there are private individuals. If you want to build a house and you can get funding from the government, then the government says, okay, you can have funding, but maybe 30% should go for social tenants, and the 70% could go for market rent. Also, there's a housing allowance. So as a tenant, I have a low income, I can apply for housing allowance from the municipality, from the city, and they send you money, and you can take this money and pay your rent with anywhere you want to. So a lot of low-income people also live in private rental, but they are in one way or another subsidized. From the beginning of June last year, they enforced in Berlin something called the Mietbremse, the rent brake. How you translate into Russian, I don't know. But it was like a rent control. They stopped because they could see, until now, rents in Germany had been going slowly, steadily up. And now they were seeing that the rents were going much quicker up. And they thought they had to do something about it. People will have problems paying the rent soon. So now it's max rent increase in over 300 German cities. So they can only landlords can only increase the rents by 10% over the local average. And the local average, what is this then? Well, it's the Mietspiegel, which has been in Germany for many, many years. If you move to, let's say, Berlin again, you can go into the internet and you can click on a map from the city and you get a map over the whole of Berlin. And then Berlin has different zones in different colors. So if you live in one part of Berlin, it's either light yellow, middle yellow, or dark yellow. So the middle yellow district where I live, that's a lower rent. And in the darker yellow, that's part of Berlin where the rents are higher. There's a higher pressure, more attracted to live in central parts of Berlin. So then you can find a Mietspiegel like this. And then you just look at how big is my flat. Maybe it's under 40 square meters, and maybe I live in a middle area, attractive area. And then I go up here and look when it's built, old built or newly built. So maybe from 1973 in western part of Berlin, and then I go down, oh, was nothing there. But Eastern Germany here. So there you find your rent. And it says this is the recommended rent. I will show you another thing. You can also, if you move to Berlin, you can go on the internet and check out this address. Then you come to a website like this. And I was thinking about maybe I should go and live in, I know there's a street called Schwedenstrasse in Berlin. So I wrote down Schwedenstrasse here. And then I just click on search. And then they ask you, what house number are you looking for? 1 to 10, 10, or 11 to 19. So then again, I go to the next. When was it built? I say between 1973 to 1990. And also, how big is the flat? I put that in. I said it's 60 square meters or under. Oh, between 60 and 90 square meters. So then I get the answer. My rent should be somewhere in between 5.47 euros up to 7 euros 2 cents. Somewhere in between here. And if the landlord, maybe you're already a tenant and you didn't know this, and you find out that, oh, I'm paying maybe 8 euros a month. So what do you do then? Well, then you go to the tenants union, if you're a member of the tenants union. And they tell the landlord, they call up the landlord and say, hey, you're charging this tenant too much. You have to lower it. Oh no, I don't do that. I won't do that, he says. Okay. Then the tenants union take the landlord to the court. They sue the landlord, and most times they win. And they sue them for money. So the tenants union make money out of suing landlords. And the tenants, of course, gain money because he or she will get a lower rent when they win in the court. So it's very strict. Oh, sorry. I want to go back. Which one? I pressed it too quickly. All right. Right now I can press it. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So just finding out how many tenants are there, and most people are surprised to learn that most tenants in the world are found in the rich country of Switzerland. 60% of all households in Switzerland rent their home. And then you have Germany, Austria, Denmark, the Netherlands, France, etc. Australia, 28, Ireland, 30, etc. And if you come to the next sort of part with the lower, you have Italy, Greece, Russia, Norway, etc. And very little rental housing in the former East European countries because they privatized their flats. The government said they had lots and lots of state-owned property. And most of it was in bad shape and had needed a lot of money to do renovations. So what did they do? They asked the tenants, do you want to become an owner of your flat? And what do you think the answer was? Oh yeah, can I be the owner of my flat? Yes, of course. So either the city or the municipality sold it very cheaply or they even gave it away. And everything was fine for a couple of years. So everyone now in the building was a homeowner. But then suddenly they looked at the windows or the roof was starting to leak or balconies were starting to fall off. So, and they were wondering, so what we do now? Because we have a lot of people in the building with no money. Because they were just owners, but they were not rich just because they were owners. So this is a situation that exists now in many Central East European countries. We have lots of poor owners, poor homeowners, which don't know how to repair their homes. And the government or the city says, well, sorry, you're the owners now, so you have to deal with this. As again, I mentioned rental housing versus social housing. Again, In Switzerland, 60%, but only 14% is social housing. The country with proportionally most social housing is again the Netherlands, with 32% of all housing, of all rental housing. These are, of course, as you can imagine, there are more tenants in cities than there are for the whole country. So if you look here, even in Geneva, Switzerland, 85% or 83% rent their homes. So here even the percentage is higher. In Berlin, 86%, Vienna, 78%, Amsterdam, etc. So in most cities in Europe, the majority or about half or even more are actually tenants. And you don't think about that because a lot of the talking is just about home ownership, isn't it? You should own your home, and then you tend to forget. And even, as I said, in the United States and also Australia, 1/3 of the whole population are tenants. But still, they only advocate home ownership for everyone. This is the situation in New York City. If you go to New York and you look around and you think, oh, beautiful housing, and you think that, of course, in the United States, everyone is an owner, of course. But here, 65% of what you see around you in New York City is rental housing. And out of those 65%, 60% are in one way or another rent regulated. They have regulated rents, so the landlord cannot increase the rents. And 40% are unregulated. There is a group of people, 9 people in New York City, that every year sets the rent for all these over 1 million homes in New York City. It's called the Rent Guidelines Board. And it's the mayor of New York City who appoints this guidelines board. And if you know who's the mayor at the moment, Bill de Blasio, and for many Americans, he's more or less like a communist or a socialist. But he, for the first time in 40 years, I would say his, because he appoints them. After 40 years, there was a rent freeze. So the landlords were not allowed to increase their rents at all for 1 year. And that was the first time in 40 years it happened. But still, the rents are high in New York City. The situation when it comes to renting and ownership. This is the situation in England from 1976 to 2014. You have home ownership, houses that are owned by people. As you see, somewhere around 2000, there was sort of the top at 70% of everyone owned their home. Now it's down to 63%. So what happened to all these people? Yes, they went into private renting instead. They couldn't afford to keep their homes, or there were young people who cannot afford to come into home ownership, so they have to rent from the private rental sector. My son, he went over to London just 3 weeks ago, together with 3 friends. He's 21, and they didn't know where to rent, so they went to Airbnb. Are you familiar with Airbnb? Yeah. And now they're renting a 1-room flat of 40 square meters for 4 persons, for £2,200 per month, which is a lot, isn't it? So I told him he has to go and find something else. But of course, for people in London, it's unaffordable. He earns very little. He works in a coffee shop. So then he has to move out maybe 3 hours outside London, and then he won't be able to get to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. They open at 7 o'clock. So he can't get to work then. So it's a dilemma for a lot of people. You cannot. So a lot of what we call key workers, nurses, teachers, firemen, police, they have difficulties in hiring these groups of people because they can't find housing in their cities. And they don't want to commute hours and hours every day. So this is a problem. And at the same time, social housing has decreased in England because Margaret Thatcher, she started it with the right to buy for the sitting tenants to privatize their social homes. Ireland is but similar. This is home ownership from 80%. is down now to 65% after the recession particularly, while private rental is going up. So people are going from home ownership down to sort of private rental instead. And also social rental is going down. So you have people who should ordinarily go for social housing, and you have homeowners who cannot afford to be homeowners anymore. They all compete for the private rental sector. So more and more people go to the private rental sector, which is the most insecure rental sector, of course. This is examples of the length of leases when you sign the normal length of a lease contract in the private rental sector. In my country, in Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, the contracts are unlimited, even in the private sector. So if you get a contract, you can, if you're a good person and you pay your rent, you can stay as long as you want to. In France, you sign a contract between 1 and 3 years. Czech Republic, 3 years. Belgium, between 3 and 9 years. England, we come down to 6 months normally for a private rental contract. In Australia, 6 to 12 months. In California, USA, only 2 months. And in New York City, in the private rental sector, unregulated, a lot of people only sign monthly contracts. So it's a very insecure, very temporarily rental sector. And the landlord, when he must provide you with the term of notice, telling you when you have to leave the flat. In Denmark, the landlord has to give you a 12 months notice in the private rental sector before he can tell you you have to leave this flat. Finland 3 to 6, France 6, Germany 3, Belgium 3 to 6. In England and Ireland, it's about 2 months. So you can imagine you write a contract for 6 months, and maybe you have a family. You have kids who start going to school in the neighborhood. And then the landlord can ask you to leave this flat with just a 2 months notice. And you have to go and find a new flat somewhere to live. Only few countries in the world, in the developed world, where you can give a notice without having a reason. Most times you have to have a reason for giving a notice. I need it for my family, say. There should be a renovation of the flat, or I need to turn it into a coffee shop or something like that. In these countries, you don't need any kind of reason at all. You can just say, sorry, you have to leave in 2 months. You have to go out. Otherwise, you need a reason. Rent regulation. I mentioned there are regulations because a lot of people around the world think that in the private rental sector, everything is unregulated. The landlord can charge you any rent they want. But that's not the case. So I mentioned already in Berlin and the rest of Germany now, New York. A lot of houses in New York City were built with state subsidies, maybe 30, 40 years ago. And by doing so, they signed an agreement with the city that they will offer rent-stabilized apartments for these tenants. Now, a lot of these landlords want to get out of this system, and they want to charge the tenants more. So there are lots of fights about this in Brooklyn, Queens, in New York, in Manhattan too. So if what the landlords try to do, he tries to push up the rent so it comes over $2,500 a month. And then this flat goes out of the system, out of the rent-regulated system. Then the landlord can charge any price they want to. But in able to do that, they have to get some tenants out of the flat, perhaps, because they have secure tenure, they can stay there. So they have guys coming by at nighttime, threaten tenants, or you cut off the wiring, or you do a lot of things, or you just you just make the life terrible for the tenants. So they move out, and once they move out, they can turn it to market rent. But even $2,500 is a lot of money. But still, if you're maybe you're 2-3 persons, and it's very common in New York that you share a flat with 2 or 3 other people with a full salary. Austria, there's rent control by local authorities, by local authority tribunals, rent tribunals. Switzerland, they can challenge the rent at the court if the landlord makes excessive income. That's the sort of the term they have in Switzerland. If the landlord makes too much money, it doesn't say how much, but if they make too much money, then they can take him to court. Also in France, in Paris, since the 1st of August, there's also rent regulation because the prices were also going up there and the government wanted to stop the rent increases. In the Netherlands, there's a maximum rent increase based on the inflation rate in the preceding year and a fixed surcharge plus an income-related component. So there are like 3 criteria for raising the rents. In my countries, as I mentioned, Sweden, the rents are set every year in negotiations between the Swedish Union of Tenants, regionally around in Sweden, together with the Landlords Federation. So it's a collective way of setting the rents. And I met a lot of people who work for landlords and they're so surprised. How come the landlords in Sweden agree to this system? Because where I come from, Stockholm, there's such a shortage of housing. So of course, some landlords want to get out of this system. But the way it is that most rental housing in Sweden are owned by institutions or private landlords who own maybe 50, 500, 5,000 and more flats. So by this collective way of negotiating the rents, they do it much quicker, much easier, and it's cheaper for everyone. Instead of having to negotiate the rent with every single person, and maybe they will go to the tribunal, rent tribunal. So that's why the landlord think it's a good idea to negotiate the rents. But as I say, some landlords, particularly in Stockholm, they want to get out of this system. So it's a big political debate about it. But as it is now, it's by law that the tenants union and the landlords negotiate the rent. So the government does not interfere at all. As I mentioned, Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, Austria, etc. have a lot of rental housing. And why is that? Why is that? Because in these countries, you feel safe being a tenant. You know what your rent will be next month or perhaps even next year. So of course, I find it okay to be a tenant in these countries. But in countries where I lack security for me and my family, I don't know about the rent. Maybe my landlord can do what he wants. He can make alterations to the flat. He can come into my flat when he wants to. Of course, in these countries, I don't want to be a tenant. In these countries, I want to be an owner, of course. So it's, of course, in Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, Austria, and the Netherlands, where the tenants have a high security, there are lots of tenants. So tenants are many and active, and they are found in most countries, as I said. So this is an example of demonstration from a tenant association in United States. HUD is the Federal Bureau for Housing in Washington. HUD sends out money to all the 50 states around the US every year to support public housing or social housing. So the tenants living in such a house have formed a tenant association around America. This is the tenant association in Warsaw demonstrating. Yaroslav in 2006. And a group of our members who met of former Yugoslavia. We met in Belgrade. Tenants in the Netherlands demonstrating, keep rents affordable. Tenants in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong inherited the British system of housing. So there is a lot of I think about 35% of all housing in Hong Kong is owned by the city of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Housing Authority. So there's a lot of public housing. And the German organization, which is perhaps the most powerful organization, or they founded in 1900, and they have over 1,000 employees. A lot of them are lawyers. 1.3 million members. So that's household members. The Swedish organization has got 530,000 members, and they each pay about 10 euros a month. So 10 euros times 530,000. That's a lot of money every month, isn't it? So the Swedish organization has got 800 people employed. So my last sort of slide is that about tenure neutrality, which is something we're trying to sell, the concept of is there has to be balance between tenants and landlords. That's why the tenants unions are needed. And also in most countries, it's the homeowners who get most governmental support financially most times. And in a lot of countries, you can deduct your interest rate from your mortgage, what you pay, from your income. The tenants cannot do that. So we say that we need a more level playing field for tenants and owners in most countries. So that was about it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Now we start Q&A session, please, if you have any questions. Yeah, Dmitry, please. Okay.
So any comments on Airbnb? It's like the third part of this equation, tenants and landlords, but increasingly the boundary between these two is blurred. Increasingly both tenants and like landlords. What is your take on Airbnb? What is the attitude of European countries here family most? Well, it seems like Uber is like, people don't, a lot of hostility to Uber in Europe.
Yes.
How about Airbnb?
Yeah. I mean, if we come to, let's say, a city like Barcelona, where lots of tourists go to, and there is a lot, I think Barcelona has the highest percentage of Airbnb. And the problem is that a lot of flats stays empty instead of having people in the neighborhood. So the small shops move out. You can't get anyone to the small grocery shops because there are no people left in the building, and the few people in the building, they don't know their neighbors. So that's sort of the extreme case of it. And Barcelona also had tried to challenge Airbnb several times to try to prohibit Airbnb. And if you read my magazine, there was an article about Airbnb in San Francisco, where they had a referendum for the people in San Francisco whether to limit the number of days that you can rent out your flat for Airbnb, and they lost actually. So there is a lot of debate about this. My opinion, yes, I think what has come to Barcelona is the extreme, because you have whole neighborhoods in the city central area which are being emptied by the residents who just let it out to temporary. So it's I don't know, young people think it's great to go and live in Airbnb, but the neighborhoods will not they will, people will move out, and there will be no sort of living neighborhoods, I think, in these places. I don't know if that was the answer or not. But we haven't a policy. We haven't said get away with Airbnb or not. We have no policy on that. Really.
But you personally, you travel here, your apartment may be vacant in Berlin.
Yeah.
Why don't rent it?
Absolutely, that's fine.
Yeah,
I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that. No, but I haven't tried it yet. I haven't tried it myself. No, but yes, it's fine then, of course. But it's the excessive use of one sort of one way of renting out in the whole neighborhood. Then it becomes problematic, I think. So it's
Okay, thank you very much. Please.
We know about Russian social rent system. It costs nothing. It costs about 2 or 3 rubles per square meter, the difference between social rent and commercial rent about 8 or 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any situation in other countries? Do you know about the social rent for nothing?
No, there is not.
And what is the average price for social rent compared with income or that's where what is the
Well, we
price
say,
for social rent in, for example, in Sweden or in Austria?
yeah. Well, first of all, the International Union of Tenants, together with many countries, they set aside that a household should not pay more than 25% of their household income for housing, including energy. But a lot of you go to New York, you pay maybe 40, 50.
Not New York.
No.
Europe.
Yeah,
Social
Europe.
countries.
Yeah. Rents, as I said, in social housing in Austria is very affordable. In Vienna, like I'm mentioning in my here. In Sweden, we don't have social housing. Sweden and Denmark are the two only countries I know of all 300 countries in the world, who don't have the social housing. So we have public housing. We have private landlords in Stockholm, Sweden, and then we have landlords who have property owned by the municipal housing companies, by the municipalities. But you can either look for a flat in the private rental sector or in the public rental sector, and the rents are comparable in Sweden. There's no really much difference between these two categories of housing. I don't know, I didn't answer your question, but social housing is lower, is cheaper in all the countries, but of course it's not free. And I don't know what more to say. We have a further question on this. I can't. Do you want to know if there's any other country where it's like in Russia?
The difference between social housing, price for social housing and commercial housing. Difference for example, in Moscow.
No,
you pay, if you have social housing, you pay 3 rubles for a square meter. If you are rent on commercial market, you may pay about 8.
Yes. No, there's no one else I know of where the situation is as you describe it here in Moscow or Russia.
You can ask differently on the competition schemes for the depending on the difference on the discount. But if there are some housing which is provided but with discounts, then there must be some system of distribution of these bonuses.
Yes.
So,
well, most times you have to queue, of course. You apply for social housing. And in Stockholm, well, as I said, we don't have social housing, but there is a municipal housing queue. In Stockholm, I can queue for a house, but maybe in Stockholm city center it takes 12, 13, 14, 15 years before I can get a flat from this queue.
so that's the typical socialistic
Yeah. So
nothing more.
So now they have like 450,000 people in this queue of Stockholm with 1 million people. So, but
is the guy.
Yeah. But in many other countries, as I said, you have a waiting list, and you look upon the needs of the household, of your income, and if you have children, of course. And in the Netherlands, it's like a point system. Let's say you're unemployed, or if you're disabled, or if you have 2 children or 3 children, you get different points, so you can apply for a flat quicker than those maybe without the needs, if you say.
If you speak about the industrial or industry-specific schemes, for example, when you want to provide housing for firemen,
Yes.
or teachers, or like this, then it must be solved by the subsidies or by bonuses from the classes to the salary to rent the.
Are you talking about here in Russia, or are you talking?
No,
but very few countries, I don't know, they're starting to build some housing in London now, particularly for medical people who work in hospitals because they couldn't get anyone to work in hospitals. Well, they could, but not enough. So they started to build houses, particularly for different categories. But otherwise, it's not heard of really. They had those maybe 40, 50 years ago, but they don't have those flats anymore, which are linked to your work like this. No, they gave that away. They gave that up quite a long time ago in Europe, Western Europe.
I think the gentleman has a question.
Sorry, do you have any information about the relation percentages of rental housing and prices between rental price per square meter and price for ownership? So, I don't have in developed countries, people prefer to rent because it's cheaper or because
okay, that's good. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point because I would say from Switzerland, Austria, and go north, people are fine being a tenant. I'm a tenant. I became a tenant a year and a half ago. I had a house and I sold my house. We split up, my wife and I, and now she bought a flat and I became a tenant. And so for in Sweden and Austria and Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, it's equal. It's a choice you make. Do I want to spend my money buying a house or a flat? Yeah, fine. But if I want to rent and maybe I want to travel or I want to buy a nice car or a sailing boat, then I do that instead because I feel secure and the costs are equal. But of course, I will admit it. Being a tenant for a long time, last 10, 20 years, you're a bit of a loser. Because the property prices have gone up, of course. But it's more of a mental thing. I mean, I'm fine being a tenant because I'm secure and I don't want to be bothered by owning something. I want to rent stuff.
I know. Because I know that in the United States, in New York, they use a time frame in years. They compare two prices. What would be cheaper? Own for 10 years or purchase?
Yeah. I guess in most countries now, it's well, I don't know, but in Sweden and in the Netherlands, you could until I think it was 4 years ago, you could deduct your whole interest rate, mortgage on your income every year. So it was very profitable. In Sweden, the owners can still do that for 30% of the interest rate. But most other countries in Europe have abandoned this system. And so, of course, in Holland and also in Sweden, it's been very profitable to be an owner. But otherwise, yes. I don't think that people sit like what you're describing, calculating, but maybe they do. But the people I met, it's more a thing of, well, where can I live? Can I afford it? And can I have a choice? Can I find nice rental housing? And do I want to maybe to work here for 2 years? I maybe want to move there for 2 years. Particularly in Europe now, even the European Union is finally accepting that we must have rental housing because people must be able to move. Labor mobility, they say. So it's something even the European Union now is speaking up for more.
But from economic point of view, I guess in the developed markets, the mortgage payment, monthly mortgage payment, and rent payment should be equal in the long term. Otherwise, it doesn't work. In Russia, it's not this way, right? So the rental payment is way lower than the mortgage payment, and the market is pretty much imbalanced. And there are many reasons for that because the mortgage industry is not very well developed and all this kind of stuff. That's why probably the question is coming from this side because, well, in this country this is pretty much unbalanced, but in New York, in Stockholm, it should be pretty much equal, I guess, right?
Yes, I would say so. What now?
In Russia, live in the center of the market. Why is cheaper than have your own outside of the market?
All right, I see. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about practice to put a cap on rental prices like in Germany.
Yes.
For example, does it affect the investment? The owners of the properties are willing to make to renovation, to building a new units.
New rental housing, you mean? Yeah.
New rental housing.
Yes.
Are there such research? How does it connect it?
Well, as you saw, this last rent cap was not. It was introduced just a year ago in Germany. So the effects have not been seen yet. But of course, there's been a rent cap already because previously, for many years, the landlords couldn't raise their rents for more than 20 or 25% in 3 years. And that was the system for maybe 20 years. But that wasn't enough, so they put more pressure on it. And let's say also the rent are regulated in Sweden, but still what's that called? The yield for private landlords in Stockholm is like 6, 7, 8% every year, even though there is let's say rents are regulated. So it's very good to be private landlords, but they complain a lot because they could know if they abolish this system in Sweden, of course they could raise the rents very much. But still, they make a good yield. I don't know what the situation is in Germany, but of course, the landlords, I'm sure they use this excuse to complain about this new system. They don't like it at all. No. Of course, yes, that's natural. And everyone wants to make money. Yes.
Just to clarify, when we are talking about regulated rents, so we are we have in mind the social housing portion of the total housing, right? So we're not talking about 4-bedroom apartment in Manhattan on 57th Street, right? So this is, it goes like market says, right? So
yes, but there's still a lot of rent-regulated housing in Manhattan. So you can live, maybe you live in a rent-regulated flat in Manhattan, and you pay $2,500 a month. And maybe you have your next-door neighbor, and they live in an unregulated flat, and maybe they pay $6,000 a month. And even there are a few, like 1.5% of the New York people, they live in heavily rent-regulated flats. And maybe some of them live in flats, maybe they inherited, because they could inherit this right to this flat from their parents, and maybe they only pay sometimes I've heard $150 a month for their flat. And that's also being debated about, of course, whether they should be allowed to have this. And so they pay $150 and the neighbor pay perhaps $2,000 or $3,000.
Have you researched some Russian situation when in the Soviet Union the system was like first the housing were provided on rent basis actually, but then somehow it was privatized.
Yes.
It was given free. If you're living there, okay, now you just yours. Have you met with such situations anywhere else?
Well, I mean,
they didn't have the social, of course, Soviet unions there. But
no, but it happened more or less in the whole of former Eastern Europe. This situation, where everything was state-owned more or less. And first the state gave away, after a couple of years, they told the municipalities, the local authorities, you deal with this housing, make it public housing. And then it was up to the municipalities, let's say in the Czech Republic, to do what they wanted to do with this housing stock they had in their hands suddenly. In some municipalities, they gave it away or they sold it. But I remember, was that maybe 13, 14 years ago, I was outside Prague, and there was a big housing estate that was going to be privatized. And there was a meeting like this, and all the people who lived there were there. But they were quite clever because they understood that. So they asked, is there any money? Is there any funding that comes with this housing? Let's say, how much money can we repair? Maybe if we need to repair these houses in 2 years, we can't afford it. So they made sure that there was also some funding that went with these houses. But in most cases, the tenants just accepted it and, hooray, I'll be the owner. And then they were suddenly the poor owner instead. And they were not in a very good situation. But my solution, of course, like in Stockholm and everywhere, if the market, the problem is in Sweden now, the market is built, but they only want to build for the upper 20% of the population, of the income, because that's where the most profits are, simply like that. Very few, the private rental sector is not really interested in low income or middle income people. They want to buy where the profits are the most. So that's why we always say, that's a lie, because the private rental sector says that, well, if you deregulate the housing system, then everything is going to be fine. There will be more, as you said, if you deregulate it, then there will be, the private rental sector will start building because there's a lack of housing, the demand and supply. But that doesn't really work with housing. Because the private sector, they're interested in building, as I said, very fancy, very nice flats, and they don't really want to build. It's not their job really, because their job is to make money for their owners and their shareholders, so it's no wonder. So that's why the governments and this city has to be involved with affordable housing for a large number of the households. There's no way around it really, as I see it.
Magnus, I want to for amazing section. You made us a bit more familiar with things. I guess most of us haven't thought about it for the lecture, like tenure neutrality, and especially for me, there are three rising thoughts. First one is breadth of European unions and institutes in rentals. Yeah. Another one is variety of regulation of housing and rental market. The third one that we discussed yesterday is insurance in rental sphere that remind me a bit our insurance system for car drivers called ASAGA. And I would ask you which things in Russia has been lost in rentals.
I don't know. It's well, I remember when I was here, was that 8 years ago? And I went to Professor Domina's flat, and she told me that this neighbor here, because they have already, many of them had registered the flats and become owners of their homes. But there were a group of people in the building that were not interested. They just thought that the government will keep paying my flat for electricity, etc. And I remember that it was so important for her to get sort of this community feeling back into the building. And this was something that she said she had lost during the last 20 years. Now it was just everyone for herself or himself in the building. Before, she told me they used to help each other, used to see their neighbors, and to come over for a cup of coffee. And she told me all that was lost many times. So there is need for more of a community. And I know you have a neighbor's day here and a tenant's day. So the tenants come out of their flats and actually meet each other. And I remember this situation so well when she told me this, that in the same buildings there could be people who didn't care about the building at all. They only care about the little 4 walls and what the staircase looked like, or the ceiling, or the basement. But I think this has changed now, hasn't it? Is there more? I could tell just in 8 years' time, just walking the streets in Moscow, I think there's a huge difference. The streets are clean, the houses look nice, and it's well, for me, it's another atmosphere. I don't know if that's true or not. And I don't know what this has to do with housing. I know it's terrible for some people who has to commute very long distances to get to work in central Moscow and can only afford a flat very far out. But I think this is the situation in all big cities, because big cities are too big. And it's...
So you're apparently a big advocate of rent control, European model, social housing, but it's like Eurocentric presentation. If we exclude Europe, specifically welfare Europe, what are trends elsewhere? Do you see interesting developments in Latin America, Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, let's put it this way. I don't really care how people live. People can be owners, or they can rent, or they want to live in a cooperative. It's fine, as long as they have somewhere to live. I mean, I don't really, but I think that there's a need for rental housing. In most countries, there's this one-eyed vision that we should just have ownership, that owners are better people than tenants. And I think this is so wrong. I think it should be a choice to everyone, whether you want to rent or to buy. I've been a homeowner myself. I had a condominium, I've had a house, and I was a tenant before, and now I'm back in rental housing again. So I like this possibility to choose. So I don't really advocate just rental housing, but if you live in rental housing, it should be secure. You should be able to foresee what your rent will be next month, maybe even next year, if you want to raise a family.
It's also there is need for freedom. Like you said, California, 2 months. The reality, like most tenants require 1 year lease.
Yes.
That's like reason, you know, you want to travel and you can't. Anyway, do you see trends, interesting developments elsewhere, like Latin America, Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East? You know, do they follow European model, or are there any changes regarding like ownership and rental balance?
I cannot say anything really about Latin America. I don't know. But Asia, no, I don't dare, because it's, as you said, rental housing is mostly described in Europe, Australia, United Nations. Rental housing is very little literature about rental housing in Africa or in Latin America or Asia. I had to go really look for it. But actually, just 2 weeks ago, we had an application from the Tenants Union in Nepal, from Kathmandu. I had no idea there was such an organization there. So there are apparently need for tenant association. There are tenants, as I said, everywhere, and the need to be, I would say, more secure in more parts of the world. But of course, I agree too. Some landlords complain that security is too tight in many countries. It's difficult to get rid of a tenant, and that's true. That's also sort of a reality, and this is not the way it should be. Of course, if the tenants, what they call in England, called antisocial behavior, and you have 3 strikes out. So if a tenant behaves badly 3 times, you're out. If you drink, or you're a drug addict, if you don't pay your rent, or if you make a lot of noise, 3 times and you're out. So there has to be ways also for the landlord, of course. I fully agree with that. It has to be a good balance also there.
Just one question about architecture, because this country is world famous by its social housing architecture, which goes back to 20s, 30s. It's constructivism. We have plenty of Karl Marx hofs here,
Yes.
like Ginsburg House, Narkomfin, like many of buildings like that. And are you aware of any experiments in this field in Europe, for example, where social housing is becoming a kind of task and goal for architects? And what kind of new trends you can observe?
So again, I have to go back to Vienna, I'm sorry, because in Vienna, the city of Vienna, as soon as there is some free land around Vienna, city of Vienna, the city buys it. And then when the city planners see that there is need for housing in one particular area of Vienna, they go out with a tender. Then private companies or municipal companies or anyone can apply for this tender. But there are four criteria which they have to meet, and they're all equal. First one is, of course, the financial sustainability. One is the environmental sustainability, and also there should be social cohesion. And the 4th one is architecture. So all these 4 are equally treated in most countries. If you look into it, it's financially. You see that in Stockholm too, but if I go to Vienna, I see the most spectacular social housing. It's because they put such an emphasis also on architecture. And also, I would say maybe in the Netherlands, sometimes in Germany. These are the countries, I would say. But there has to be some. I think that they had to do like that. They had to put in Stockholm when they build new houses. It all looks the same. It's just glass and metal. But
no, I mean the typology of the living space. For example, you have communal spaces at the first floor, for example, shared by tenants, right? So, and your living space is only limited by, well, for example, bedroom and dining room and this kind of stuff. Are any experiments like that?
There are a few experiments with co-housing, like cooperative housing, collective housing, where the tenants get together and you cook your meal together, and you can have guest rooms. You have one each room. It's like living in a dormitory as you were a student, more or less. You can have 1 or 2 rooms, and then you share with each other. But very, very few, I would say. But there are wishes for it. I know there are a lot of people who would like to live like this. I don't know why it should be so difficult to actually realize these houses. It seems to be difficult. I don't know if it's the financing or whatever it is. But a lot of people I talk to, I would like to live more like a collective living. We share the responsibilities, we cook together. But very few places, fortunately.
Did you research the question of the Russia? I think they called apartments, flats and apartments. You know that in UK this is called flats, in the US apartments, but in Russia there are flats and apartments, and the different apartments are something between flats and the hotel.
Yeah, we talked about that last night, and I had no idea. I didn't know there existed such a intermediate housing.
No, this is a legal difference because apartment has to actually comply with well, the flat has to comply with certain standards, legal standards, and apartments by definition they are not for living. But people can rent it for living, so legally this is nothing. I mean, so it's just, and that's because they cost you much less. You can live there, but actually it's not so legal. It's sort of in the shadow, right?
The question is, well, it's not like this. Well, this is it's a legal thing, but there is the question of semi-flat and semi-hotel. So there's another segment. When they built the hotel, which is like long-term hotel.
It's a part hotel. Part hotel.
Yes.
What's it called?
A part hotel. When,
part hotel.
Yes, people usually invest in this. I should say that's looking like boxes, boxes for living. Some investor can buy a flat or a couple of flats, and then he will enter with them into the market and have some kind of rental competition, and they are cost like the same place, but the building itself has lots of social infrastructure.
Okay.
So it has a lobby, like in a real hotel. It has a gym, maybe swimming pool, some restaurants above the building, and some laundries and so on and so on. So, but it's usually it's more an investment on the first step,
Okay.
and after that it is a real. It's a real rental possibility.
I see. I don't know. I haven't come upon those kind of intermediate ways. I think it's because in Western Europe, I think housing at all is so regulated. So there is perhaps no space for these kind of inventions, maybe for the good or the bad, I don't know. Well, yeah, there could be more experimental living, yeah, definitely. But I can just add one more thing. I don't know, when you move into a rental flat, what comes with it? Does it come with the with the sink, with the refrigerator, with the stove, with everything? Is it fully equipped when you move in here? Depends. Because in Sweden, everything comes with it. Even a dishwasher or whatever you have. But if you go to Paris, I was so surprised. I came into a flat which had been renovated. And I came into the kitchen, and there were just 2 pipes, one cold water, one hot water. And the tenant had to bring everything in. And of course, when people move out to tenant flats in Paris, most times they take out the cupboards, the wardrobes, and everything, and bring with them. And I say, why do you do it? Well, everyone does that. Well, isn't that stupid? Well, maybe it is. So IKEA makes a lot of money because people have to install everything from the beginning. It's just bare walls when you move in. If you don't, of course, you can speak with the previous tenant. Say, hey, you want to leave this? I can buy it for you. I take it over and give you some money. But it's an option. So I was so surprised here. So these are also very different wherever you come in the world. What comes with the flat? In Sweden, there's always a laundry room in the basement. Where I live, there are like 3-4 washing machines, and there is a table outside. I put up my name when I want to do the washing up. So this is what comes with every rental flat in Sweden, and that's very uncommon. I speak to people and say, common? What if they come the next person and he goes into this room and my underwear is there, my laundry, this is so private, people say. Oh yes, well, it's just my clothes, I think. But other people think it's such a private thing to have your clothes there together with other people. So it's just sort of a lot of things has to do with mentality and culture.
All right, I think we are running out of time a little bit. Thank you very much for your answers. It was really great, and so I need to give the floor to Tatiana for a couple of minutes. All right?
Простите, я по-русски. Российская ассоциация нанимателей жилья, она создавалась в 2006 году. Если вы мне в 2006 году сказали, что в 2016 вот будет аудитория так внимательно и заинтересована слушать лекцию про нанимателей, я бы ни за что не поверила, потому что на самом деле мы были рождены Еленой Сергеевной Шобиной, которая нам рассказывала про жилищную лестницу, начинала рассказывать о том, что существует в мире, какие течения жилищные существуют и как они развиваются. И тогда вот на этой базе мы в 2008 году написали, так у нас создалась такая группа из активистов в 6 регионах России, мы написали проект «Сеть школ жилищного просвещения». И вот тогда мы начали изучать опыт других стран, нам там повезло, еще тогда были иностранные работодатели, да, нас еще иностранными агентами не называли. И тогда нам удалось изучить опыт нескольких стран и вникнуть вот в ту разницу, да, в те процессы, которые происходили там, и сравнивать их с Россией. И дошло до того, что уже где-то в 2010 году нас приняли в Международный союз квартиросъемщиков, и где-то, наверное, в 2011 году мы сделали такую большую поездку в Данию, куда взяли депутатов нашей Федеральной Думы, более-менее чиновников, от которых зависело развитие жилищных вопросов в России. И нам тогда удалось, вот после этого как раз Хованская написали и пролоббировали закон о некоммерческом найме жилья. И начались вот эти процессы, когда мы уже начинали разговор про нанимателей с гражданами, с жителями, то они нас стали как-то хоть прислушиваться и хоть как-то понимать. Нам есть сейчас о чем говорить вот с людьми про найм. Потому что до этого нам было про найм говорить нечего. До нас кричали, что наниматели это плохие люди, ну, квартиросъемщики, там, не знаю, как их правильно называть, да, но что только собственники, и надо все делать для собственников. И мы с большим трудом пробивали вот эти вот слова про нанимателей, и даже школа грамотного потребителя, проект, который сейчас существует вместе с Минстрой и партия «Единое насилие», чуть ли не с головы она вылетает. Вот этот проект, значит, он существует сейчас и активно реализуется во всех регионах России. И называется он «Школа грамотного потребителя» только потому, что Елена Сергеевна настояла, что нельзя давать слова «собственник» или нельзя давать слова, ну, понятно, что наниматель никто не думал, да, и вот настояли на слове «потребителей» жилищно-коммунальных услуг, потому что на самом деле у нас просто вот найм цивилизованный, он какой-то еще пока не цивилизованный, мягко так выражаясь, да? То есть нет у нас еще вот тех, ну, то ли мы это действительно, как вы тут обсуждали, я не очень хорошо я понимаю, по-английски не все поняла в вашем рассуждении, да, про доходные дома и про все остальное. Слава богу, мы хоть историю сохранили и запомнили, да, но вот вернуться к этому, к сожалению, практически невозможно. И сейчас дома, которые у нас строятся под некоммерческий найм, они все равно будут такими, ну, какими-то гибридами, непонятно чего, да, коммерческого найма, вот путного, толкового, цивилизованного, белого, не серого и не черного, с налогами и со всем остальным, нам еще в ближайшее время пока не светит. Вот я бы очень хотела, чтобы лет через... Да, Российская ассоциация нанимателей жилья все-таки должна жить. Сейчас она зарегистрирована в Ярославской области, и понятно, что только один проект нам удалось реализовать на 45 регионов России. Понятно, что о найме мы говорим, и информационную составляющую Елена Сергеевна как может держит, да, вот весь лучший опыт объединяет в этом журнале замечательном Global Tenants, и я крайне благодарна студентам, которые переводят этот журнал, потому что других вариантов у нас сейчас с финансированием пока на найм получить финансы практически невозможно, не говоря уже, потому что мы сейчас сидим на грантах российских, ни в российской системе, ни в региональной системе вот, этих субсидий, да, государственных. Единственная еще проблема может быть, мы вспоминаем о нанимателях, когда их права сильно ущемляются. Да? И вот здесь, вот, когда вышел закон о капитальном ремонте многоквартирных домов, куча регионов России сразу подняли плату за социальный найм ровно на сумму капитального ремонта. Вот в Ярославле произошла картина прямо цифра в цифру. Ну, благо нашлись активные жители, которые понимали, что так делать нельзя, начали сопротивляться этому процессу. Ну, не знаю, благо это или нет, потому что на самом деле дома ремонтировать надо. И я, наверное, бы не стала защищать уж так этих людей, которые сопротивляются капитальному ремонту многоквартирных домов, потому что они иначе просто попадают. И в такой ситуации у нас сейчас идут суды, и прокуратура каким-то образом эти вопросы тоже разрешает. То есть у нас пытаются вот права нанимателей защищать. И есть все-таки люди, правозащитники, которые обращают на это внимание. Но я уже говорила, когда рассказывала о региональных проблемах, сейчас не буду на этом останавливаться, чтобы не затрагивать ваше время, но проблемы с нанимателями в регионах, поверьте мне, не одна, не две, а там уже в десятку подходит, и действительно эти проблемы каким-то образом решать надо. Я благодарна вам за такой интерес вот, к международному опыту и призываю вас обращать серьезное внимание на российский опыт. И если у вас есть на то силы, энергия, здоровье, то обязательно постарайтесь развивать тематику найма в России. Спасибо.
Спасибо. Я хотел бы сказать, что Елена Сергеевна Шомина, для тех, кто не знает, ну, во-первых, это такой ключевой специалист по как раз вот проблемам, связанным с жилищной экономикой, и она научный руководитель магистерской программы в Высшей школе урбанистики. So I just mentioned that Елена Сергеевна Шомина is the academic supervisor of master program in the High School of Urbanism here in Moscow. So that's why we made so many references to her. And actually, I would like to thank her for inviting you, Magnus, and Tatiana, and because, well, we actually learned about your activity from her. So, well, many thanks to Elena Sugena. And I'm sure she's going to be around at some point. Okay, so I guess we need to close this very interesting session. Let us give a round of applause to Magnus and Tatiana again. Thank you very much.
Dinner was so late. You need a clock in here.